Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Delivery Pod. I'm Kevin Savage.
I'm Nicholas Marquardt.
And before we start, don't forget to hit the follow and subscribe button. We don't want you to miss anything.
Today, and in the next 7 episodes, Kevin and I are going to break down the evolving world of last mile logistics, especially in cities. I think to most people, last mile logistics is just a package that shows up on your doorstep, when really, before it gets there, it goes through a long and complex journey. And the nature and the cost and the length of that journey is changing drastically these days. And so Kevin, from his vantage point on his side of the industry, and myself on mine, are going to break down the key factors that are changing that world and the key outcomes that we expect today.
Thanks, Nicholas. I think, we've broken this down into eight episodes. Those 8 episodes are going to go into detail, and we'll touch on those a little bit later. But we'll look at it from all sides of the spectrum. As you say, you come from a different field than I come from. Mm-hmm. So we've got 2 here, but we've got some great guests to come on. So I'm really looking forward to talking to them.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Maybe we can start off with some intros so the listeners know who they're listening to. My name is Nicholas Marquardt, and I'm head of strategy at Zoomo. Zoomo is a provider of light electric vehicles for commercial purposes. And so when people hear about micromobility providers, they often think about the shared players like a Bird or a Lime, or they'll think about bike subscription services like SwapFits and Dance. The kind of guiding vision at Zoomo is that we're focused on urban logistic miles. And so the thinking is alongside our vehicles, we also offer maintenance and software and financing. And this all bundles into this product that we call our bike as a service subscription. And so, last mile logistics is notoriously the most difficult part of the chain, the most expensive part of the chain. I think it's 54% of cost normally. And Zoomo's goal is to fundamentally break that and make it inherently more efficient.
Great, thanks for that. I'm Kevin Savage. I'm the COO at Delivery Mates. So I'm trained in logistics and supply chain, so nothing as glamorous as the bike world, but just trucks, sheds, lots of different sectors. But more recently, I've worried about last mile logistics. So last 10 years is recent. Mm-hmm. Not in your world, but in my world, last 10 years is recent. And I've really focused around that last mile logistics. So I've been with Delivery Mates for a couple of years now, led the strategy in terms of making it sustainable logistics. Mm-hmm. And that is a number of focuses, really. One is moving away from the ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, into electric. And we've got some big ambitions to move ourselves fully away from there by 2024. So that's the strategy I've been working on. The company refocused in 2020 on this. It just said things are changing, and it was right at the forefront. So it had done it. It actually opened, I think, because I don't have the proof, I think is the first micro hub in London.
That's a big claim.
It is a big claim, and listeners tell me if I'm wrong. But we did that, and when it was successful, that's what's changed the strategy. That's what said we need to change. The world is changing. How can we change? And that's where sustainable logistics came from.
Great. It's been great to have your kind of contrasting experience between these logistics giants and how they worked historically compared to newer, nimble players in cities these days. So the structure of this podcast is going to be around 3 core forces at play that Kevin and I think are the distinct forces that are changing delivery in the urban space these days. And so we're going to spend a number of the next episodes going through these in more detail, but just to kind of whet the appetite and discuss them a little bit up front, these 3 forces are the accelerating world of e-commerce and the number of packages that we're receiving on a daily basis, the nature of our changing cities, and what municipalities and governments are doing there, what it actually means for companies that are operating in that space. And lastly is the evolving world of consumer demand. and what we expect today versus what we expected 5 years ago, and just how fast that's changing. And so, do you want to tackle or at least start discussing the first two, and I can do number three?
Yeah, sure. I'll do the first one. The first one in terms of the volumes is really interesting. So when you look at volumes on a daily basis, 21 is when the last data came out. Average in the UK is 11 million packages delivered every single day.
Per day.
So it's 11 million. It's just a big number. It's lots of zeros, but it's a significant. Every package is somebody's order.
Yeah.
And that we'll come on to in a minute on customers. But that's in terms of growth, and the growth is been accelerated by COVID. Yeah. Everybody knows it's been accelerated by COVID.
Yeah.
The fact that it grew in 21 by 47%, nearly half as much again.
Whereas historically it was growing at
10%.
Okay.
So
that's kind of 5 years in one go.
5 years in one go. And the figures from 21 to 22 are expected to be in the order of 30%.
Okay. And so
exponentially that growth, that hockey stick really took off in those COVID years, but had been taking off before then.
Yeah. And so a number of industries really exploded during COVID. And now as people exit their homes and get back to normal life, we're seeing them kind of step back a little bit. But you're saying the growth here is only continuing.
Yeah. Excuse me. All the indications are that that the growth is continuing. It will go back to probably 10% year on year.
Yeah.
That's what the forecasters are saying. People have got used to the e-commerce world now.
Yeah.
We all do it in our everyday lives. I'm sure everybody at home does it. You just think of something and you buy it. Provided you can afford it, but you do. That's the world we go. We don't go to retail in the same way. We go to retail in a different way now. So all the predictions are that 10% annual growth between now and 25 is still the forecast that the guys have got.
Yeah, I don't want to throw too many numbers at the listener, but I think the interesting thing that we were looking at was that in the UK, the average household in 2020 ordered about 100 packages to their home. By 2025, that's expected to be 225 packages. And that's an annual figure, and that's not a daily figure, but you're seeing kind of 2.3x growth in a 5-year period, and that's households. Now, on top of that, we're talking specifically about urban delivery, right? And the broader macro theme of what's happening the world over is just this urbanification, where I think in the 1970s and 1980s, maybe 30% of the world lived in cities. By 2050, that'll be 80% of the world. So we're piling into cities and we're ordering more online. And so the first cause that we're talking about is just the quantity of packages being delivered to people's homes is increasing at a stratospheric rate.
Yeah, and I think the customer side of things is a change as well. That was the piece that we talked about.
And so that's point number 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
And point number 2 is when Amazon first came to the UK, it revolutionised things by saying you can have your package in 2 days.
Yeah.
And subscribe to Prime, get it in 2 days.
And that was
2 to 5.
That was 2014, 2015 kind of thing?
No, it goes back a little before then when there was mainly CDs and books.
Okay.
When they became a full e-retailer in 2009-10, I think it would be. That's when they started to really take off. And next day then became the norm. Yeah. So next day was a competing norm. So everything came through, you ordered it, you get it next day.
Yeah.
Then you get to time slots and dies, etc. I think we've moved on in cities, particularly in cities. You know, we know now that you can order most things in a 10-minute, a grocery 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, that world of fast commerce is here. It's still developing, but it's here. So if you think we've gone from 2 days down to 10 minutes in a matter of years, it's that customer expectation is there. I think the other thing is technology, that customers expect to know everything that's happening with their order.
From a tracing standpoint.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not overly doing it, but nevertheless, we've become used to, thank you for your order. Orders picked, orders packed, orders dispatched.
Here's where it is. Here's when it'll arrive. Yeah.
And this is when it's going to arrive. It's going to arrive next day. It's going to arrive in this 2-hour window. It's going to arrive in this next 15 minutes.
Yeah.
The people are used to that. They're also used to knowing there's safe delivery places. So a photograph of your parcel is not unusual
Yeah.
when the delivery is made. So that consistency I think it's driven e-commerce, because people are not afraid to order online now, because you're going to get it when.
What about customer input? I think historically you ordered a package and then they kind of told you when it was going to arrive. I feel like these days there's more optionality around you yourself as a customer choosing when it arrives.
Yeah, and all the networks are up on this, so you can choose at checkout.
Yeah.
Next day, same day sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Specific day.
A slot, yeah.
So you can have everything consolidate in one go.
Yeah.
So there is always a change, I think, in terms of what the customers are getting and choice at checkout.
Okay. So we've said that the number of packages being delivered in cities is rising at an incredible rate. The speed, but also the way that being delivered is changing. And then the last factor that we like to touch on is that the cities themselves are changing. And, you were talking about the effect that COVID had. This is another area where COVID had a huge effect, where cities are inherently focused on livability and less about being a labor market. And so what that looks like in practice is cities across the world are putting in congestion zones and adding cycling infrastructure, and as much as possible removing through traffic and other forms of traffic that are seen as unnecessary. And so what that means for the logistics provider that's historically relied on a fulfillment center that's outside of town, that loads up its trucks in the morning, that does this hour trip into the city and then spends a whole day doing drop-offs and then goes back out to the outskirts, is that system doesn't work anymore. You both have a vehicle that's being taxed to operate in the city, and then it's also able to do fewer deliveries because it's fighting low traffic neighborhoods in Hackney, London, or it cannot enter Le Marais in Paris, or Barcelona super blocks are blocking it as well. Just cities across the world are prioritizing a different form of mobility, and that's not only going to be on the consumer on the cycling side, that's also going to be on the logistics side. And so those are the three big factors that Kevin and I see as the forces at play when we talk about this, evolving world of logistics.
So when we project in that way, Nicholas, I think the pod episodes we've got coming up tackle some of those.
Okay. It's
probably worth running through some of those in terms of detail. I'll kick off and you interject as always.
As always.
So the first piece for me is in terms of as a disruptor, and this is a disruptor for everybody because cities are changing.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got, I think it's still a well-founded, efficient networks of delivery services. If there wasn't, we wouldn't be doing 11 million packages every day.
I know quite a few delivery startups that would challenge that, but for now that's fine.
But in terms of the episodes that we're going to look at, I think it's worth just going through those. So micro fulfillment, we've touched on it earlier. It's worth an episode in by itself. I call it micro fulfillment, micro hubs. This is how those big centres are diversifying into small centres in cities.
Yeah, I touched on it up front, but an MFC is a term that you and I throw around a lot, but it might be worth just spending 15 seconds right now explaining what exactly an MFC is.
Yeah. So an MFC, in easy terms, is a small amount of stock holding in a small location close to the neighbourhood where consumption is going to take place. So you take it as a supermarket. And the best analogy I can give you is that when Aldi first came to the market, they have a limited amount of SKUs. They don't sell everything that Tesco sell. So an MFC is a smaller, again, supermarket that you can't see and you can't go and buy, but you can buy online. So you can buy it, it's in your neighbourhood, it can be picked and with you in 10 minutes.
And so in that example, we're talking about groceries or food, but this also stretches to other product categories, right?
The other categories are coming in: high value, high usage, small volume in terms of volumetrics of the product, but it can be close to the consumption. People are wanting it.
And this is the bread and butter of the Delivery Mates business model. And so look forward to hearing you break that
Micro-orbs
down.
a bit, probably more, but we'll come on to that as well. So micro-orb is slightly different. Micro-orb is more of a cross-dock facility to be able to
We need
parcels in.
we need to keep some of this content
Yeah.
for the rest of the episode. So episode 2 is micro fulfillment centers.
Yeah. I think then we can come on to, I think the exciting part is delivery vehicles. They're changing almost by the day. Electric vehicles. Some of the logistics are moving to electric vans, but that still creates congestion, and it still won't be able to get around cities. So when we talk about micro mobility, we want to talk about light electric vehicles, which I think for the listener and the viewer, they probably haven't even seen. So we really want to get the manufacturers in, and the 2 or 3 that we can get in, and talk in detail about how that's going to scale up and how it is scaling up.
Yeah. And the different flavors that it comes in. Is this a 4-wheeler with a 2 cubic meter box on the back, or is this a 3-wheeler with a smaller box, or is it an urban aero equivalent with a front loader and something you put kids inside? It really comes in different sizes, and we're kind of in the early stages of a lot of these vehicles. Yeah. And so I think it'll be interesting to break down the different ones and how they each operate.
Yeah. Legislation.
Of course.
So we've got our governing bodies introducing taxes everywhere, emission zones and whatever.
Yeah.
But they're also responsible for, the laws governing their boroughs. So talking to people like Transport for London would be really good if we can get someone from Transport London to come along. Or one of the councils, pieces like that. And there are some forward-thinking councils here that are really doing some groundbreaking stuff for the UK, but still well behind Europe, I believe.
Yeah, I live in Hackney, and I think 2 weeks ago they just announced that 75% of the streets in Hackney are going to be closed off, at least to through traffic, to cars that are not residents. And so there are certain municipalities that are making big pushes in this space.
Yeah. Urban infrastructure, you're saying that obviously councils are making the changes, but I think in terms of those road networks and being able to change, and I think there's a question: how much is public funded, how much is privately funded, how is this going to take place? So understanding how quickly the infrastructure will be catching up will be an episode in itself, I'm sure.
Perfect.
And then I suppose technology. We talk about people's thirst for information, consuming it in different ways.
And when you say technology, do you mean software specifically?
Software and hardware.
Okay.
So hardware, I'm thinking in terms of telematics have been around a long time in larger vehicles.
Yeah.
How do they come into light electric vehicles, and how do we manage that fleet using the same knowledge that we've got from a commercial fleet over the years?
Yeah, and that could be factor number 4 up front. Of we're keeping it to these 3 factors that are changing urban delivery, but honestly, the kind of software evolution and our ability to handle large amounts of data in real time could be a factor number 4. If you think about things like live routing, historically you would set out on a whole day for a whole day delivery. Now you can pick things up along the way. You can drop it off at another place. There's a lot more flexibility built in there. And at every step of the delivery chain, there's a software kind of package that's doing something there. And so, Zoomo is heavily involved in that space in certain parts of it. And then we'll have some guests in that touch on other parts of that.
Great. So lots to talk about.
Yeah.
Lots to talk about. That's why we said 8 episodes. So really on the next episode, I think we will really get into the micro-fulfillment, micro-hub. We'll get guests from property world and probably the fast fulfillment. Mm-hmm. We'll get those 2 guests in, and we'll talk a lot more in detail about what's driving from their perspective. I think it's a really good episode. I think there's a lot to be said. So you'll have to keep explaining it.
As you run through this list, it's interesting because we set off on this podcast to talk about urban delivery, but ultimately it's the factors and the influences are so wide ranging that ultimately we're going to end up talking with legislative bodies around what's happening in cities or software providers around how they're building their code. I mean, it's incredibly wide ranging stuff.
And maybe that's the problem. Maybe because it's so wide-ranging, that's why we're not going as fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
But hopefully we can declutter some of this in this next 6 or 8 weeks, and we can talk about that in detail. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So on the next episode, we can talk about micro-fulfillment, micro-hubs. We can talk about all the differences between the two. What's the difference between the micro-hub being a transfer point and the micro-hub?
Yeah, very excited to start covering that next week. But let's keep some of that content for next week when we have our guests on. So I think we can wrap it up there. If you've enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe. We'll leave all the details to our socials in the episode description. If you have any comments or retorts, or if we said anything wrong, feel free to reach out. I'm sure we'll be doing lots of that. And I think that's it. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week.